Our next speaker is Jocelyne Mendez-Guzman from Toronto Metropolitan University. Jocelyne is doing a Master's of Science in Molecular Science, and her presentation is titled, Hijackers in My Gut? It's More Likely Than You Think. Over to you, Jocelyne.
Diarrhea. For some, it may be the result of eating a really greasy burrito. But for others, it's actually a matter of life or death. My project focuses on a specific strain of the bacteria E. coli called EPEC. Now, EPEC is different from regular E. coli because it causes diarrheal disease. And what's super interesting and unique about EPEC is that it uses a super unsuspecting weapon to cause damage. It doesn't use a sword, and it doesn't use nunchucks, but instead, it uses a syringe. So, the syringe is actually a part of EPEC's body. So once it makes its way down to our gut, it'll find our intestinal cells and stab them. And now that it's created a hole in these cells, it's going to introduce a cocktail of proteins. Now, it turns out that this cocktail of proteins is actually a pretty terrible thing, because these proteins are actually master hijackers. So once they're inside our cells, they're reprogramming that environment and turning our cells into a place that's way more favorable for them to grow, spread, and thrive. Now, this is the opposite of what we want, especially considering the fact that there are no current treatments and no vaccines against EPEC infection. And to make matters worse, current medical advice is to rehydrate the patient and let the infection pass. But what if the infection doesn't pass? Especially for mothers in developing nations. Instead of spending that first year of their child's life teaching them to walk and talk, they're spending that first year in a hospital room with their child hooked up to an IV. This is a terrible reality, but it doesn't have to be ours. What if instead we learn to hijack the hijackers so that we can understand why they're released in the first place and stop it altogether? This is what my project aims to do. I want to understand how I can stop these protein hijackers from being released so that we don't have to deal with EPEC infection anymore. On top of that, our lab has data that suggests that a mystery protein tells EPEC exactly when to deploy this army of hijackers. Once we find what this mystery protein is, we'll be able to turn it off, prevent this hijack, and finally have a fighting chance against EPEC infection. Thank you.